be alive in this land of ours. Good to drive in this land of ours.
Hello, Canada hockey fans in the United States.
The Hockey Time Machine.
Going into the series, the fans' feeling towards it, the media's feeling towards it, is that not only was this kind of this big series, not only that were we going to win, but this was going to be a smashing, overwhelming victory. I think that what changed it was when it got to be so tough in the series. That's when the real pride and the deepest pride, came out. And I think it was at that point the Canadians surprised ourselves at how proud we were and how much we wanted this victory.
A clip from Summit 72, a four-part documentary premiering Wednesday, September 14th on CBC. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hockey Time Machine. I'm Glenn Dreyfus. For its 50th anniversary, the epic Canada-Russia series, the Summit series, deserved an epic retelling. I had the privilege of previewing the 4-hour documentary, 4 one-hour programs, and we're privileged tonight to be joined by 3 of the individuals who put it together. So tonight we discuss the Summit series and the making of the documentary. Nick DePonsier is the player coach of this filmmaking team, the series producer, co-writer, co-director, director of photography, and he's president of Mercury Films. Hello, Nick. I'm sorry, after reading all those credits, we're out of time.
How are you, Glenn?
When you take on a project like this, do you try to read everything about it and watch everything about it? Or do you try to read and watch nothing about it so that you can approach your take with fresh eyes?
The former, definitely. You want to steep yourself in whatever's out there, whatever's been done before. And in a subject like this, there's 50 years worth of literature, of other films, of different perspectives through those decades. You want to gather all of that information in, and in a case like this, if you're of the age that it's in your DNA, it's already there anyway. But you want to bring all that in so that you can forget it and start fresh, but still not be duplicating, have the language that is an educated language that is going to build on top, hopefully, of what's come before.
Which was more philosophically important to you, telling the comprehensive Summit series story or unearthing new voices who might have been excluded from previous tellings of the story?
I think our small and mighty team realized early that we could never tell the comprehensive story, that the first question that you'd have to ask yourselves is an unanswerable question, is whose comprehensive story? there are so many people all around the world, and especially in Canada, who are so deeply invested in this that there is no comprehensive story. And our answer was to try and have as many voices, some expected and some unexpected, as would fit in the vessel of the 4 1 hours that we were given by the CBC, to try and, I guess, in a way, be as representative as possible. And that's different from comprehensive. And when you look at our documentary series, we don't show every goal. We don't show every, story beat in a hockey sense, but we'll really park and dwell on some of the moments that are the emotional epicenters and unpack them and have a bunch of different comments, sometimes conflicting, as a way of trying to have the sort of prism of all of the voices, all of the people who care about this story and love it so deeply, hopefully represented.
You mentioned your small and mighty group, and I wanted to ask you about that, Nick, because in one way you faced kind of the same issue as Team Canada in 1972. You had an all-star group of producer directors that you had to make into a team. Tell me about that process.
We had very little time when Ken Dryden and Serge Savard and the organizers from Team Canada, who had said to themselves first, hey, the 50th anniversary is coming up. This is a chance to really examine our legacy and to really have a moment in time that unpacks the meaning of this amazing event. And they passed the baton to us, and there really wasn't a lot of time. And there was a global pandemic, which was another impediment to working quickly. So we needed a team, and we needed, just like Team Canada, to become a team. And I think we did, quicker than they did, because we all knew it from the beginning. And it's certainly the biggest show that I've ever worked on. I'm used to working on a project with a smaller number of people for a long period of time. This was a big and mighty and intrepid team, and it was a crucible of work and creative effort and creative energy and pooling of knowledge and sharing of passion.
Well, and it also helps that there's no egos in the world of TV production.
We did okay.
Nick, we're going to have you step aside for just a few minutes, but please stand by so you can rejoin us for the full panel discussion. Thank you, Nick. Now we want to welcome in Robert McCaskill. If you enjoy watching equestrian events at the Olympics or anywhere else on TV, Robert is the man to thank because he revolutionized how those are shown. For Summit Series 72, the documentary, he's producer, co-writer, and co-director. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Glenn. Great to see you again.
Same here.
Thanks for inviting us on tonight to Hockey Time Machine.
I'm glad to do it and excited that you made time for us. Bob, this is at least the 5th project that in part or in total you have participated in about the Summit Series. So I was wondering if you could explain why the Summit Series is a well that you can continue to draw from.
Well, just a moment ago, you were talking with Nick about starting fresh, and there's two sides to that coin. It could be considered to be impossible to start fresh, but on the other side of the coin, there's always something new that you can uncover. And certainly I was privileged to, asked to take this story on 30 years ago with the CBC in a program called Summit on Ice. And one of my gleeful moments at the outset was, wow, I get to watch the games again. And the games were not available, was the first thing they had said to us. They had been erased and recycled by all the networks in Canada that had broadcast them. And we, through the ensuing 30 years, tried to see if there are other copies elsewhere in the world. It took about 10 years. We did find elements and pieces. Paul Patsko helped extensively with that process. And I think, that's indicative of just continuing to turn over rocks and finding more things that we could bring to the public so that we could refresh their memory. And, I commend the CBC for doing this program, because there's a whole generation and a half who did not experience the Summit Series when it was played live, which was an extraordinary time for those of us who were alive at the time and who loved hockey and loved Canada and loved drama. And so, I think there are an awful lot of new things that will come to the screen on this, as well as, further to what Nick said, all kinds of different points of view and maybe a deeper look at Canadian culture and its impact on Canadian culture than what we've ever experienced before in any other previous telling of this story.
You were specifically in charge of episode 2, which covers games 2 through 4 in Canada. What are the production techniques, the mechanics of basically being part of a relay team where you're handed the baton from show 1 and then you have to hand it off eventually for show 3?
Well, I first want to say I wish our fourth director was here, Dave Bedini. I know Ravi is going to come up after I have a moment to tell a few lies with you. But yes, and we collaborated extensively on all episodes. The real answer to your question comes in 3 words: story, story, story. And I think it's the manner in which we've kind of woven these things together, not just to tell the story of what happened in '72, but to tell a timeless story about Canada, Canadians, and where we are today and how '72 did affect us.
Bob, if you're not lying, you're not trying. So thank you. With your permission, we'll have you hang tight for a few minutes. You can sit and think about some more false stories to tell, as long as they're good ones. But thank you. Right now, we want to chat with the cleanup hitter of Summit 72, Ravi Baikwal, who shepherded the 4th and final hour of the series. Born in Toronto, Ravi these days anchors and reports for the ABC news station in Chicago. So first, Ravi, what is it like to be a Maple Leafs fan behind enemy lines?
Well, Glenn, I had to move to Chicago to see the Stanley Cup actually being awarded to the hometown team. I mean, I've seen 3 Stanley Cups here. I've seen an amazing run. I've seen what hockey can do for a community. I've seen what excellence really, really looks like. I mean, we're about to go into a fallow period here in Chicago, but maybe it'll turn around again going forward. But I mean, all kidding aside, it's not enemy lines, because hockey is a really universal activity, relatively speaking, and I think that it's really one of those situations where we're in a position to tell a great story about this essentially origin story about where the game is now and how it's understood now here, especially in an American context. And I'm just so could never have imagined that I would be in a position to be at the apex of helping to tell the story about hockey, about Canada, in America, about a come from behind story. And I am telling you, Canadians, actually, anyone who likes a great yarn, but Canadians are going to love this story.
Well, I want to follow up on that and what you said a second ago. What is your sense of the awareness of the Summit Series in the States?
Unfortunately, it's not great. I think that I spent a lot of time explaining what the context was, and many people here kind of equated to their Miracle on Ice in 1980, where the United States Olympic team beat the Soviet team that was at the apex of its power in 1980 at Lake Placid with a bunch of college kids, and it was a total come from behind victory and a David and Goliath story, and that's a really big part of the sporting vernacular here. And I tell them, like, look, this is that story on steroids for an entire country. So, and sometimes it's hard to really market a story that's about quote unquote Canada. But when you make it about people and you make it David and Goliath, you make it about hubris, and you make it about expectations dashed, and then people coming back from it and learning something about themselves. People are really interested. And one of the things that we're working on quite a bit right now is some US and international distribution. And I know that there's some interest at ESPN. Make no mistake, when people get a hold of this piece, they're going to be riveted by it because it is, as usual, just a great story about human emotion. It's all about people.
I think as a filmmaker, you had a unique challenge because in Canada, at least, if there is one game and one moment everybody knows, it's Henderson scores.
Yeah.
So what was your methodology of trying to bring a fresh perspective to such a well-known event?
I think, Glenn, the important thing is to recognize that people know what happened, right? And we know what the entire story is. It's no question that Canada won, but Canada won by the skin of their teeth. And what did that mean? And how did we get to the point that it was just the skin of our teeth? And these are the themes that kind of go through all the episodes that lead up to the episode that I was deeply connected to. And make no mistake, though, when we get to that moment, and I don't want to give too much away, but I'm not giving much away because the fact is we know that Henderson scored the goal and we won. But to get to that and tell it in a storytelling way that creates tension and anxiety and want from the viewer, we had that in this movie. I will tell you that Nick DePonce and I, with Robert McCaskill, with Dave Bedini, we spent, I don't know, I'm going to tell you a little inside story here. We spent 90 minutes, if not more, in just the sound mix studio about the Henderson goal. And that's not to say that that's to try to make it more than it was. It's just that important. And the way the storytelling works, and what Nick and Robert had mentioned earlier, the way we bring in different voices to try to tell the story in a different way, it doesn't matter that you know the outcome. It's how you get to it. And truly, I think Summit 72 is about this journey that our country went through, and what it meant for the country, and what it continues to mean for the country now is where a lot of the value in consuming this resides.
If you watch the Summit series for no other reason, you got to watch it to hear Foster Hewitt as a rap artist. And I won't say any more.
Yeah. Let's leave it at that. Sometimes it happens. You don't know what you want to say as a broadcaster, so you go, and then next thing you know, it kind of works, right?
And then you say, I meant to do that. Okay.
Well,
in the fourth episode, you also expand beyond Game 8 to discuss diversity and inclusion and the places hockey still needs to go. Why was that important?
Well, I think that something that was really important to the entire production and to Nick DePonce particularly was to try to tell this story through a modern lens. And the country that we have now, our beloved Canada, obviously is very different from the country that was in 1972 when I was 7 years old. And so what makes it relevant now is to try to tell that story from back then in a context that's relevant to what not just the geopolitics, but what the country looks like now, what the country feels like right now, what role hockey plays in the cultural attitude of the country right now. And we really were striving to tell that story through that modern lens. And that is a deeply impactful moment, I think, for consumers of this documentary going forward, that will really resonate, that I think that will really help them understand. We're not trying to sort of say, here's how you need to think about that thing that happened 50 years ago in today's context. We're just saying, look at where we were, look at where we are. That event had an impact on where we are now, and let's explore some of those issues that got us to that. It's up to the viewer to decide what is more important and what is less important in that. I think we have produced a very, what I would suggest is a very dense documentary to give people fodder to contemplate that. And what else is a documentary supposed to do other than get you to think a little bit? And if you're thinking about what it means to be Canadian and what it means to love hockey and what it means to enjoy the incredible heroics of these people that we loved so much when we were young, you're going to get a lot out of this by investing your time watching this.
Ravi, nobody told me that I'd have to be doing thinking.
No, it just happens. It just sort of happens.
All right,
It just
Laura,
sort of
if you would, I'd like to bring Nick and Bob back in to join Ravi and me. And guys, as we talk, please feel free to piggyback on each other. And if you want, take the conversation where you want it to go, and I'll be happy to sit back and listen. But Nick, I want to start back with you. Something you mentioned when we talked a few minutes ago. In the press notes, you said, quote, one of the biggest challenges our creative team faced was to answer the questions around whose 50th anniversary story of the Summit series should this be? So, Nick, what was the answer you ultimately came up with?
I hope that if we were successful, our ambition was to make it as many people's 50th anniversary as we possibly could. And there are some core constituents, obviously. The players are always in our mind. And there's lots of pinch me moments when you're my age and your wife is saying dinner is ready and you're saying, I'm talking to Ken Dryden. So, there's in a way, this will be part of their legacy and freezing this moment in time 50 years later. And that's a big responsibility that we all felt. The Russian players as well. I think it's become this fruitful dialogue over the years, as any of them will tell you, that the animus and the competition dissolved and evolved over time into this wonderful back and forth, which was an expansion of worldview on both sides, which was, a crack of light that got wider and wider through the decades as the world opened up, the wall came down, those Cold War polar dynamics went away in favor of something that had much more mutual understanding. If you look at Phil Esposito, he was the guy who was the most jingoistic, the most, talking about and echoing the propaganda and the stereotypes of the time, the Cold War stereotypes. And he literally said, if I had a gun, I would have killed all those guys. And no one has spent more time in the intervening decades in Russia with Russian friends, doing hockey exchanges. He has the biggest character arc in a way to sort of prove that wonderful dynamic that started with this unprecedented meeting of best against best, against all odds, against all political odds at the time. Of course, in the middle of filming, the sweep of history came back and revisited horrors that haven't been there in a long time. And that was another challenge for us. We had interviewed a lot of the players, in fact, almost everyone before the war in Ukraine started. We we weren't going to turn it into a political documentary, just like we weren't going to turn it into a complete investigation of the state of hockey today. There's so much, I think, to be learned. 50 years is a long time in our modern age, but to be able to toggle back and forth, it's living history. These people are alive. There are a lot of people who do remember it, or their parents. Hopefully, the younger generation will really understand. The Beatles, Get Back, and 1971, the music that changed the world. There are a lot of documentary projects right now, the Woodstock and the Summer of Soul documentaries that look back 50 years. It's a really interesting interval because it's not abstract history. It's living history. So as many voices along that journey that we could give a point of entry to, that was our ambition.
I think one of the interesting things further to that as well, Nick, is this is an era of the Cold War. This is an era of us and them, us against them against us. And absolutely, we were adversaries on the ice, just like the political systems were adversaries. But it is also a time, as we cover briefly in the documentary, where, the Prime Minister of Canada and Premier of the Soviet Union were trying to meet and exchange ideas. Hockey was part of it. Hockey was a handshake, and hockey was something that began to bring, people together. And although they were fiercely combative through the series, what time has done with the dose of respect that both countries and both teams derived from each other and their conviction for their game and for their country, we have become friends. Things, as Nick just mentioned, have changed, over the past year. We were on a trajectory, and we have been for some time, where there was, much more of a common bond between the peoples of our country, which was the original intent by the politicians who helped enable the series. And it also leads to something that we touch on, and as Robbie does in the final episode, delivered by Ken Dryden, where to some extent there is a shared victory in this. Canadians are very strong in saying we won the series, and we did win the series. We won more games than the Soviets did, but as Ken will outline in episode 4, we each shared a victory, and we each got what we needed out of the series. And I think therefore a bond was established, and certainly between the players, and in the reunions that they've had and visits that Canadian players have made back to Russia, you can see that there's a friendship there that will be eternal, despite the politics today.
And to that extent, I think that some of these outcomes, Glenn, were completely unforeseen. This idea that what Robert's talking about and Ken Dryden talks about, which is this idea that we didn't know what it was that each side wanted and what each side needed, but each side got essentially what was required by that moment in history. And we get into that and we explain it in very clear terms that I think is really compelling. And in the context of 2022 and Ukraine and geopolitics and stuff like that, without going down a line that kind of takes us away from the hockey. And these guys can tell you, these guys will tell you, Glenn, that I was the guy who was always saying, keep it on the hockey, keep it on the hockey, keep it on the hockey, because the hockey is amazing. It's Phil Esposito, it's Tony Esposito, it's Brad Park, it's all these wonderful players, all these Hall of Famers, all these Stanley Cup winners. Keep it on the hockey. But despite all that, we are able to always circle back and be able to understand how going through this process of them playing those games and Canadians and the world kind of getting excited about it changed all of us. And that is what the story is about. The outcome was something that we didn't kind of even imagine was going to be something that we were thinking was part of this effort to begin with. And that, I think, gets across in this documentary.
The quote from episode 4, the Ken Dryden quote that Bob mentioned, is Dryden saying, "Neither of us got what we wanted, both of us got what we needed. And in the same episode 4, Serge Savard calls the Russian players brothers. So, Bob, they could never have imagined that they'd be saying those things before the series started.
That's correct. And probably the two most flagrant examples are Mikhailov and Esposito, who battled profusely on the ice and all kinds of gestures and checks and stick work in the corners. But even those two over time developed a great deal of respect for one another and also established a bond of friendship, which is pretty extraordinary when you consider where they were. And that doesn't always happen on the field of play.
Ravi, I'll send this to you first. Anyone can chime in on it. But the creative team made a decision, an artistic decision, to go without a narrator for this series. So 2 questions. One, why? And secondly, how much did that increase the degree of difficulty in putting together your shows?
Well, I'm a news guy, and everyone, when they ask me about this project, it's like, are you not narrating it? No, I'm not narrating it. I think what this is about is particularly Nick de Ponce's vision about telling a story that tells itself. There's enough archival video, there's enough stuff, information from old interviews and new, to be able to take this story and let it move through what we call the actuality, which is the actual stuff that happened. And you don't need a voice of God, you don't need a news anchor, you don't need somebody to tell you what to think. It is so compelling, it's so layered. The music, the history, the archival video, the interviews that we're doing in today, but you're looking at a video of the player who's talking, and that's him playing 50 years ago. And then underneath all that, you've got maybe Foster Hewitt's game call about something that player is talking about now. You didn't need a narrator. It's frankly, it's harder. It's a way more sophisticated way of telling a story. You could tell, the cow jumped over the moon and just say, okay, here it is, and here's the voice of God telling you that. Or you can layer the story using all the elements that we had and have taken advantage of, and try to write something that works with that. And I am telling you, I am so humbled to be part of a process that has allowed us to indulge that. Because for what I do on a day-to-day basis, we don't get to indulge that too often. We don't get to indulge the way archival video looks or the way someone wants to hear something. But we have got that piece of it there to allow people to make their own judgments about it. And sometimes with the narrator, you follow what the narrator says, but maybe not here. We're expecting the viewer to be engaged a little bit more, and I think they're going to get way more out of this. And to what Nick was talking about in terms of the Beatles 1971 documentary and other ways, this is a better way of telling it. When you've got the guts, when you've got the raw material to work with, the video, the archival discussions of what the principals were saying back then, and you are able to put that into modern context now, it's a way more interesting story.
It also, sorry, Nick, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that really our gift, I think, in being able to do that and to reach for that level of storytelling and have 40 narrators, most of whom were there, instead of one more reductive. It circles back on your original question of whose story is it. It is lots of people's stories. So if lots of people should be able to tell their stories. But the other gift that we had through, reaching through time was that a documentary film crew followed the whole series and filmed exactly what you would want to film if you could time travel and go back. They filmed training camp. They filmed the press conferences. They filmed the very political receptions with all the players in their suits and ties. They filmed a bit of hockey action, and that film never got made. It's been used. Excerpts of it has been used in Robert's films and projects through the years, so we're familiar with some of it. But 16 millimeter film is an amazing archival medium. The things that we shoot digitally now might last 10 years, and then they'll be gone. They'll be lost to whoever might be interested after. But the Hockey Hall of Fame, we thought it was going to be 30 something film reels that had been sitting there. In the end, it almost broke the bank, but we transferred with the latest technology almost 100 reels of film, a lot of which has not been ever seen since 72 and has never been seen publicly. And instead of a bunch of people, talking heads, narration, sitting there telling you what happened, we really try and take you there. We really try and put the viewer in the moment, in the arena, with Foster's Call, with the crowd around you, so that you can, if we've been successful, relive that excitement, the highs, the crushing lows, and all of the twists and turns. And that would not have been possible without that amazing archive.
And Nick, tell them, Nick, if I may jump in, tell them about how, again, how authentic that archive is, how much, as you described to me, how much vinegar you ran into dealing with these reels that nobody had looked at for decades, and that we're being able to rescue some of that stuff.
Listen, I think it's the right amount of time. There's a lot of the material was right on the edge. It was degrading, especially the sound material. Unfortunately, a lot of that didn't survive. The archivists who went through and lovingly prepared all of the film reels for transfer, when they hit some of the sound reels and opened them up, they had to run outside because it was toxic fumes of whatever had been happening inside of there. So some of the audio is lost to history, but the amazing thing is that now it does have like a fresh start, a new baseline, and all of the collection will go to the Hockey Hall of Fame, will be available for anyone who's interested, for scholarship, for future films, for anyone who wants to be able to relive that. So that's one thing that this 50th anniversary has afforded, those archival materials, which I'm really happy about.
Glenn, your question was really important, and I think fundamental to the approach of this documentary. And I would just like to add to what Ravi and Nick have said. There is a great purity and a genuine quality when you speak to the principals and the eyewitnesses and use them as storytellers, a narrator, and no knock on narration, because we do need that for all kinds of purposes and all kinds of productions. But in this case, yes, it's a tremendous challenge to work without a narrator. But it is, I think, a tremendous gift to the audience to be able to remove that filter and have it a direct story being told by the people who created it 50 years ago and who experienced it 50 years ago, as well as those who experienced the repercussions of 72 in the decades that followed.
And Glenn, I got to tell you, man, as a professional narrator, I would have loved to have narrated this. But I knew it's way better the way it is this way. And I'm just so pleased. I'm so pleased it's a big deal for me to step back from something. And it was a big deal. People are going to love this because it's so damn authentic.
I'll tell you too, insider story, I hope he wouldn't mind, but Ken Dryden called me at one point in the process and threw his hat in the ring, just saying, hey, not sure what you're thinking about for narration, but if you know Ken, he's such a deliberate and conscientious storyteller, and cares so much about this. I think it wasn't to assert himself out of any kind of vanity, but then he would know that he would have some element, some view on what was going on for quality control as well. I think may have played.
Nick, for the record, I would have deferred to Ken Dryden. Just
wise. I'm not just being a good guest, but before we move on from the archive topic, this whole series does not happen without Paul Patskew, who is, of course, one of the producers of Hockey Time Machine, but it absolutely doesn't happen. And if you talk to any archival researcher, if you talk to any hockey druid in this country and around the world, they will know that Paul Patskew is is and has an incredible trove of knowledge and artifacts, and there is no way we could have combed through or drilled down on the gold in amongst all of this archive without Paul's guidance and expertise, and we were just incredibly lucky to have him as a collaborator from the very beginning. He was one of the first calls, absolutely.
Can I just say, he was so into this project, Nick. I mean, I think the three of us were out talking. Maybe there might have been a beer involved or what have you, and then an issue came up about something that needed to be determined. Did somebody do this or do that? And so Robert goes, "Oh, well, let's just text Paul Patsku." Before the next beer was served, Patsku had an email or a text back to Robert answering the question as to whether I don't know, the sixth goal in Game 7 was scored by Parise and who assisted. It was so amazing. Paul Patsku, this could never have happened without him.
It's not just this particular documentary. Paul and I have had the great pleasure of working together for many years, and I had mentioned that the series had been destroyed, and Paul, along with me and other people, worked extensively for years and years and years to collect material to put these games back together again. And without his effort and his knowledge and his determination and dedication, I don't think any one of us single-handedly ever would have been able to do that without him. So Paul is woven into every frame of this documentary and the 72 series itself.
Okay, 3 things. Number 1, Paul is going to be impossible to live with, so thanks a lot. Number 2, I will look forward to the Ravi Baikwall cut of this documentary with his narration. And number 3, I have the headline from this conversation when it's over. DePonsier says it was a toxic work environment.
Come on, Nick. From 500 miles away? Come on, really? Okay, fair enough.
We've all been in the business a long time, and you had mentioned earlier in a teasing manner, Glenn, about all the egos and whatnot, and through an awful lot of productions that I've been through in my life, this is one where it was just a glorious effort in that everybody's focus was on the story and bringing the best story to the public. And in so many instances, we see people vying for their level of importance or their self-importance. And that just really wasn't part of this production. And I think that, too, contributes to why it is such a good documentary series for people to watch.
Okay, let's work our way along Game 1 through Game 8 and some of the wonderful nuggets that you all dug out. And Nick, you were particularly responsible for show 1. I don't know if the term bulletin board material had been coined in 1972, but the Canadian media sure provided enough of it for Team Russia.
Yeah, no, I mean, everyone just was writing. They couldn't write the script fast enough to set up. I mean, Shakespeare would have like torn that up and thrown it away. Said no one will ever believe it. That if it's that extreme, I've got to temper it a bit. But there were. Just like so many things in history that take you by surprise. In retrospect, there were a few people who were prescient or cautious, and Harry Sinden got laughed out of the game tape of the day, which was of course like an old newsreel of the Russians, and nobody took their opponent seriously, and that made the fall just so much more precipitous when it happened. It was more disbelief and completely spinning out of compass when Game 1 just kind of, as Dryden says, everything just started to get away from you, and you couldn't get it back. It just kept racing away. And I mean, that happened to the nation, right? We had so much invested in the myth, that when the myth was shattered, that was hitting bedrock, and everybody knew it. I mean, I think that makes the stakes of this so high. And if I mean, in the course of my life, Canada's grown up a lot, but I think our psyches were more fragile then. Dryden says it's not in the doc. I fished for it again in the interview, and he didn't rise to the bait that time. But he said, I honestly wonder if we had lost that series, and he was so young at the time, right? That would I have been able to collect my ego enough to continue, my confidence enough to continue? He really questioned that, and I think that is a microcosm for a nation. Like, if we didn't have hockey, at that point, that would have been a very fragile time, I think, for the nation.
Ravi, Team Canada didn't do itself any favors either. Phil Esposito was quoted saying, "We didn't take training camp seriously, but the Russians sure did."
That's right, and I think that speaks to something that works thematically in the documentary series, which is about this idea of respect for your opponent. And I think that there was classic Canadian, well, not Canadians aren't full of hubris, generally speaking, but there was the character in a drama that's full of hubris and thinks that they're the best and is untouchable, and all of a sudden reality comes back in and bites them in a very clear way where there's no question about that, and you don't know what to make of that. You just don't know. And one thing, to kind of to what Nick's point was about what Ken Dryden is saying, is like, Canadians never really thought about it a lot, but the fact that we made such an effort to be relevant and be considered to be the best about hockey was a big part of the Canadian, I don't know, headspace, zeitgeist, whatever the word is that you want. And then as kind of relatively unimportant in the grand scheme of human endeavor as that might be, versus, I don't know, philosophy or art or dance or literature, our thing was hockey. And to have that actually taken away was going to be something that was going to be very difficult for us to fathom. And I think at some level, these players kind of maybe knew that, maybe they knew it for themselves, and the country got the way the country got behind them for that, to be able to realize our a renewed national identity that went around that. Maybe hockey is just a vehicle for it, but it was something that gave birth to, yet again, a new sense of connectedness of what it means to be Canadian. And make no mistake, as a minority kid, born and raised in Toronto, but on the outside looking in, but still part of the inside, and now I live in the United States, that's a real thing. And that's a theme that really matters, that people are going to resonate with, I think, in this documentary.
I certainly hope so. And Nick, the other thing episode 1 clearly showed was, before Team Canada could fight the Russians, they had to stop hating each other.
I loved that detail. That was learning for me, that that it was so clannish back then. Mahav didn't talk to his brother during when they were playing each other, and they were taught that sort of deep hatred. They used the word. We hated it. They hated us. We hated them. If you're a Ranger, if you're a Bruin, you're not going out for beers after like they do now. They probably play juniors, and I think it was a time too where it was a big deal to switch teams. I think there was much more old school allegiance and identity. Whereas now I think it's more transactional, and more fluid. And so yeah, for the unprecedented best on best, 72 was the first Team Canada. They coined the term for that team, and not everyone was happy with it. But I think when everyone, players and fans alike, just realized how incredibly exciting it was to wear the flag on your jersey and pitch yourself for all the marbles against an arch rival, not just another team in the NHL, but a real arch rival, that this was going to stay, and we needed to learn how to do this, and that afterwards, and it's in the doc. I forget who, somebody says, maybe it's not. It was just in one of the interviews, but in a warm up in an NHL game after, somebody went up and tapped the shin pads of an opposing player, and his teammate said, "What the hell did you do that for?" And he goes, "Team Canada."
Yeah.
We have
Sealing and Espo.
Was it Sealing and Espo? Sure.
Yeah.
And I bet that was replicated many times. That was that there was a new dynamic. There was a higher purpose that no one had known. They'd all climbed to the top of their mountains, right?
Right.
They'd come from their towns. They had been better than all those other kids. They had scrapped their way into the NHL, and then these were the best of the best. And they thought they had climbed the highest mountain, and then there was a new mountain, and that was international play.
And they didn't even know that mountain existed, and they didn't think for a second that was something that they had to surmount, and that the surprise factor of all of it happening in a relatively short period of time was part of an educational kind of throughput that all Canadians kind of went through here, which was part of what made the country grow. And I think we try to reflect a bit of that in the documentary.